What would you do if at your own wedding, the one day where everything is supposed to be about love, commitment, and family, your father-in-law stood up, raised a glass, and announced to a room full of guests that he was taking over? Not a joke, not a slip of the tongue, but a smug declaration that the life you thought you were building with your wife was, in his eyes, just an extension of his empire. That was my reality. The music had just slowed down. Everyone was smiling. My wife looked like she'd stepped out of a dream in her dress, and then he stood up. I thought he was going to say something heartfelt about how proud he was, maybe a story about his daughter as a child. Instead, he tapped his glass and said, "Well, everyone, today is special. Today I officially welcome my new son-in-law into the family. And let's be honest, he's not just joining the family, he's joining my legacy. From this day forward, I'll be taking over." At first, people laughed. They thought it was a joke, some fatherly ribbing. But the way he said it, the firmness in his voice, the way he lingered on the words taking over told me he meant it. He wasn't talking about welcoming me. He was talking about controlling me, about reminding me in front of everyone that marrying his daughter meant marrying into his dominance. And the worst part, my wife didn't even flinch. She laughed along with everyone else, like it was just harmless fun. But I knew. I felt the shift in the room, the way some of the men raised their eyebrows, the way some women whispered into each other's ears. They understood what was really being said. He wasn't celebrating me, he was claiming me. That night was supposed to be the start of my independence as a man, as a husband. Instead, it felt like a contract I hadn't signed. He spoke about his business, his influence, his connections, and how now that I was in the circle, he'd make sure I stayed in line. People clapped. My wife smiled. And I sat there, my jaw tight, forcing a grin, knowing that if I protested in that moment, I'd look like the bitter groom who couldn't take a joke. So I swallowed it. I told myself I'd deal with it later. But here's the thing about moments like that. They don't just pass. They burrow into you. They plant seeds of resentment that grow into entire forests. In the weeks after the wedding, I replayed his words over and over. Taking over. What did he mean? Was it symbolic, or did he truly believe he was entitled to dictate our lives? It didn't take long for me to find out. The honeymoon was barely over when he started inserting himself into our decisions. My wife and I wanted to rent a modest apartment, something affordable so we could save. He laughed at the idea. "Nonsense," he said. "I'll get you one of my condos. I'll cover the first year." At first it sounded generous, and my wife jumped at it. But I knew what it really was. A hook. A way to tie us into his leash. Sure enough, within weeks he was showing up unannounced, dropping off furniture we didn't ask for, insisting we use his contractors for minor repairs. It was like the toast wasn't just words, it was a mission statement. I tried to push back gently at first. I told my wife I wanted us to make our own choices, to stand on our own feet. She'd smile, kiss my cheek, and say, "He's just trying to help. Help." That word became poison in my mouth. Because it wasn't help, it was control, dressed up as kindness. Every gift came with strings, every favor with an expectation. He'd say things like, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." But what he meant was, "I'll decide for you." The cracks in my marriage began to show faster than I expected. My wife adored her father, and I understood why. He had always provided, always been larger than life. But I started noticing how she deferred to him, even in private. If we disagreed about something, she'd call him. If we planned something, she'd run it by him. Slowly, I began to realize that when I married her, I hadn't just married a woman, I had married a dynasty, and I was the outsider expected to bend. The breaking point came one night at dinner. We were sitting at my in-laws' house, a massive place with marble floors and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a museum. I'd had a rough week at work, grinding out long hours, and I mentioned casually that I was considering applying for a promotion. My father-in-law smirked and said, "Why bother? You'll never make what I make. Focus on helping me with the family business instead. That's where your future lies." He said it in front of everyone. My wife, her mother, her cousins, and again they laughed, like it was all in good fun. But I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't joking. He wanted me under his thumb. I went home that night, angrier than I'd ever been. I told my wife, "I need you to understand this isn't just banter. He means it. He thinks he owns us." She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said, "You're overreacting. That's just how he is." But I wasn't overreacting. I was finally seeing clearly, and the more she dismissed it, the more I realized we were on two very different pages. What nobody tells you about marriage is that it's not just about love, it's about alliances. Who do you align with when the storm comes? And I was starting to fear that when the storm hit, she'd align with him. But here's the thing. I'm not the type of man to let someone write my story for me. The toast at the wedding might have been his attempt to mark his territory, but in my head, it became a challenge, a line in the sand. He thought he was taking over, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. So I started playing a different game. I stopped rejecting his offers outright because I realized that's what he wanted, to paint me as ungrateful, to make me look like the stubborn outsider. Instead, I started nodding along, letting him think he was winning. I let him brag about how I was joining the legacy, how I was lucky to be part of this family. But quietly, behind the scenes, I was building something of my own, saving, investing, networking with people outside of his circle, because if he wanted to play power games, I wasn't going to fight on his turf. I was going to create my own. And that's where the story really begins. Not at the wedding, not at the toast, but in the slow, deliberate way I learned to push back without him realizing it. Because taking over works both ways. And the man he thought he was pulling into his empire was about to surprise him in ways he never saw coming. I knew from the moment he raised that glass at the wedding that this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. That toast wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. My father-in-law wasn't the kind of man to joke without intent. Everything about him screamed control, from the way he walked into a room like he owned the air, to the way people leaned forward when he spoke, to the way my wife's posture always changed when he entered. She became smaller somehow, deferential, as if her voice had to make space for his. And the more I lived with it, the more I realized his taking over wasn't just about money or influence. It was about shaping the entire dynamic of my marriage. He wanted me to be the son-in-law who said thank you and fell in line. But I've never been good at falling in line. The weeks after the wedding were in education and subtle power moves. One day he showed up at our condo with new appliances. No warning, no asking. Just a truck parked outside and a couple of men hauling in a stainless steel fridge and a washer-dryer set. My wife clapped her hands like a child on Christmas morning. I just stood there numb as the men disconnected the perfectly fine appliances we already had. No son of mine should live with cheap junk, he said. I wanted to scream, I'm not your son. I didn't ask for this, but instead I forced a smile. Because I'd learned something important. If you fight him openly, he makes you the villain. He twists the story until you look like the ungrateful fool, and he looks like the generous patriarch. So I started collecting. Not appliances, not money, but moments. Every time he crossed a line, every time he turned my life into his stage, I logged it. Not just in my memory, but in the quiet details. Texts, receipts, side comments that could easily be forgotten. Because I knew one day there would come a reckoning. And when it did, I wasn't going to stand there empty-handed. It wasn't long before the next intrusion came. We'd been married 3 months when he invited us over for dinner. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back, glass of wine in hand, and said, "So when are you two moving closer to us? I've got a house coming up for sale just 2 blocks away. I'll handle the paperwork." He said it like he was offering a gift, but what he was really saying was, "I want you under my thumb, close enough to watch." My wife lit up, said, "That would be amazing, Dad." And I sat there with my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, wondering if I was the only one who saw the trap. That night, on the drive home, I finally said it out loud, "He's trying to control us." My wife shook her head, sighed, and said, "Why do you always see it that way? He just wants to help." That word again, help, it was becoming the wedge between us. I told her, "There's a difference between help and ownership." She went quiet after that, staring out the window, and I realized she wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe she never would be, but I was ready. I threw myself into my work like a man possessed. Every promotion, every new project, every late night at the office, I treated it like ammunition. I built savings accounts, started small investments, expanded my circle beyond anything tied to my father-in-law's empire. Because if I was going to survive this marriage, I needed leverage. Independence wasn't just pride, it was survival. Meanwhile, the father-in-law kept escalating. He'd make little comments at family gatherings. "Don't worry, I'll guide him. He's still figuring things out." Or, "One day, he'll thank me for showing him how it's done." Everyone laughed, clapped him on the back, treated him like some oracle. And me? I smiled, raised my glass, but inside I was filing it all away. Every word. Then came the incident that cracked everything open. We'd been planning a vacation, just me and my wife. Finally some time away. I spent weeks researching, saving, booking flights. The night before we were set to leave, my wife got a call from her father. When she hung up, her eyes were wide, her voice apologetic. "Dad says we should go to Italy instead. He knows people there. He'll cover the hotels." I stared at her, stunned. "We're leaving tomorrow. Everything's booked." She shrugged helplessly. "But he already made arrangements." That was it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about him. It was about her too. She didn't just accept his control. She welcomed it. And if I didn't draw a line, our marriage was never going to belong to us. I told her no. I told her we were sticking to our plan, that we weren't puppets. We fought like we'd never fought before. Her accusing me of being stubborn, me accusing her of being blind. She cried. I packed. And the next day we got on the plane to the trip I'd planned. It was awkward at first, tense, but slowly away from her father's shadow, she softened. We laughed, we explored, we remembered what it felt like to be us. And for a fleeting moment, I thought maybe I could win this battle after all. But when we got back, he was waiting. literally waiting, standing in the lobby of our building, arms crossed. Hope you enjoyed yourselves, he said. But remember, your life is bigger than just you now. You married into something larger. Don't forget it. It wasn't a threat, not in words, but it was in his tone, in the way my wife stood beside him, silent. And I knew this war wasn't over. So I changed tactics. If he wanted to play games of power, I'd play too. But not his game. Mine. I stopped resisting his offers outright. I accepted his gifts, but I documented everything. I let him think he was winning, while I quietly built a separate foundation, financial independence, private contacts, my own safety net. And the more I built, the more I realized something crucial. The only way to beat him wasn't to fight head on. It was to outgrow him. Months passed. My career climbed. I launched a side venture that took off faster than I expected. For the first time, I was making money that rivaled his gifts. And that's when the shift began. He'd make a comment at dinner, and I'd counter it. Not with anger, but with calm confidence. I'd say, actually, we've already handled that. Or, no need, we've got it covered. At first, he brushed it off. But I could see the cracks forming. The patriarch who'd declared he was taking over was starting to realize I wasn't the type to be taken. The final confrontation came almost a year later, at another family gathering. He raised a glass again, smirking, and said, well, looks like my plan worked. He's come around, joined the fold. And this time, I didn't smile. I stood up, took the glass from his hand, and said, with all respect, I'm not part of your fold. I married your daughter, not your shadow. We make our own decisions, and we always will. The room went silent. My wife's eyes widened. He stared at me, his jaw tightening, but for the first time, he didn't have a comeback. Because the truth was standing right there, undeniable. And here's the thing. Once you stand up to a man like that, once you show him you can't be owned, he has two choices: keep fighting or respect you. Slowly, begrudgingly, he chose the latter. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He saw in my eyes that I wasn't going to bend. Now, when I look back at that wedding toast, I don't hear humiliation anymore. I hear the start of a challenge. He said he was taking over. What he didn't realize was that his toast lit a fire in me that made me stronger, sharper, and more determined than I'd ever been. And in the end, he didn't take over. I did. I took over my life, my marriage, my future, and nothing, not even a man who thought he owned the world, could change that. Because the truth is, no one takes over your life unless you let them. And I never will.